right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Next Ripple Ventures Tank Talk with founder and CEO of Q4 Incorporated, Darrell Heaps, on discussing about how being an elite athlete helps make you a better CEO. Thanks for joining us, Darrell.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, just a quick background on Darrell for everyone out there. He is the founder and CEO of Q4 Incorporated, which he's been running for the last 15 years. It was awarded the 2016 Deloitte Technology Fast 500 Award and voted the best place to work in Canada in 2019. Prior to that, Darrell was the president of Weave Communications for 4 years. And prior to that, he was the founder of NChaos Interactive Media, which was acquired in 1999. On the personal side, Darrell is a member of Team Canada National Ski Moguls team, a World Cup finish in the 11th place, and he's an extreme mountain bike racer. Now let's get into the topic today, Darrell. Life as an elite athlete. Can you tell us a bit more about your career as an elite mogul skier training with Team Canada at the World Cup level?
Yeah, I grew up skiing, so grew up in Toronto, Canada, and grew up skiing. Started ski racing just kind of socially. It's kind of what you do because the hills are so small around here. You kind of get into programs and stuff. And I started to get into to mogul skiing and started to get more serious and kind of made my way up from like local events to provincial to Ontario, and then skiing kind of North American competitions, and eventually made my way to being added to the Canadian team as the Canadian D team, which meant that I skied kind of like North American World Cups as well as select European events and actually in Japan as well. And I think that the thing that always, for me, that I always really was attracted to from in terms of being an athlete was that it's very defined in terms of, you know, you're here, you want to go here. There's many people that have done it before you in terms of the path that you need to go on, what you need to train, what you need to commit to, the sacrifices you need to make, the skills that you need in order to continually progress. And, you know, there certainly is like a DNA component of being an elite athlete in terms of the sport that you select, but it really comes down to work ethic and commitment and sacrifice in terms of the progression that you can make to get to the point of kind of your ultimate performance. But for me, what I found was my kind of breakout time that I began to really do well was mentally. So I began to learn about meditation, about visualization, about being able to really understand how, from a mental perspective, to put yourself in a position where you can deliver your ultimate performance when it really matters. And I think that's something which really defined me in my kind of earlier years. This is kind of during my teenage years, from maybe 16 to like early 20s. And that aspect of kind of that mental performance, I think, you know, that's ultimately what comes down to what separates kind of, you know, who wins and who doesn't in competitive sports is that mental game is what really separates, because everyone can put all the time in to have all the skills and the level of performance, but who can deliver it when it counts really separates, you know, the winners from the losers.
Yeah, and you hear about that a lot with like Olympic athletes, where there's a set path, a set course that you go through, whether you're training with Team Canada or Team USA or something, over the journey to get to the Olympics. But you also can't really tangibly see the meditation part and the mental part that goes into it, because that isn't a clearly defined like workflow. Whereas you can be in the gym every day working on certain skills and defining your, you know, certain parts of your routine. But on the mental side, there really isn't a framework for that. And that's so like inner strength that you just don't really get to see it in the media and things like that. It's come out more and more, obviously, with all the mental pressures on elite athletes. But so you were in your teenage years when that came around. Was that something that happened externally to you that made you think like that?
There was a particular coach that had a real impact on me. This guy named Stephen Faring, and he kind of brought that to me, being like, okay, it was kind of early in that. I think it's much more defined now at elite levels, that kind of mental training aspect. But back then it was pretty new, and so went through a lot of it, and you know, a lot of it is. It really is kind of visualizing yourself going through and performing, so that you begin to have like muscle memory and mental memory about how to perform when it counts. And I think now it's more refined now than it was then, but it certainly is a key component. Just because everyone is at such a high level, there's such a kind of evolution in every sport of progression that separating yourself mentally is really the only way to win now.
Yeah, and we're going to discuss how that translates into the corporate setting. But before we get into that, we know every athlete has some bumps along the way, and I'm sure you have some stories as well. So, can you tell us about some of the setbacks and injuries you faced along the way during your journey of being an elite athlete, and what lessons did you learn from it?
Yeah, sure. I think the screenshots that you have up there are absolutely perfect, because many instances like that. So certainly there are, there's aspects where I guess personally I always, and I still feel this today, like if you're not crashing, then you're not trying hard enough. Like you're not pushing yourself hard enough if you're not failing. And the reality of that is that sometimes that ends in injury. For me, I blew my knee out maybe about halfway through my career, was off for like a year, major knee surgery, came back, had like my best years after that. And that really took like a real commitment to come back and focus and to be able to get back to that same kind of level. And then I injured it again, and then ended up kind of retiring kind of shortly thereafter. But I retired more because I kind of achieved what it is I'd set out to, which was to compete at the World Cup level. And once I did that, I'd always been more, my dream was not necessarily on the athletic side, like skiing. It was to build companies. That was kind of, I was like 11 or 12 years old. That's kind of what my dream was before I got into skiing. And so at that point, I felt like I kind of done what I needed to do in the skiing side of things, and then, pivoted that and went back to school. But I think that hurting myself and coming back really kind of ingrained a sense of resiliency and committing to a process of continuing to recover, but then to get back to that kind of performance level.
Yeah, and I'm sure, as it happens with so many other people in the elite athlete space, when you see others go through it, you can kind of think about like how much work they had to go through to get back onto the field. But when it happens to you and then you have to overcome that, that's when you really start to ingrain that, sense of adversity and perseverance that you need to experience yourself so that you can apply it to the rest of your life. So was there a moment in time where you're like, okay, enough's enough, I'm going to retire, but I'm not going to just take this lesson and throw it in the back seat. I'm going to continue moving forward and using it throughout the course of my life?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I felt like for me, when I was doing that, I was kind of putting on hold what I really wanted to do, which was to be an entrepreneur. And I put that on hold long enough, and I kind of got to a point where I could have taken a path of continuing to ski, but that would have taken me in a different place. And I felt like I was kind of, okay, I put this other dream on hold for long enough. So I'm going to go back to school, because I took like 6 years to finish high school, and then I took like a year and a half off. And so after all that, I was like, okay, I want to get serious about the business side of things. And so, retired that and went back to school.
Wow, that's a perfect segue into the next section of how being an elite athlete helped you handle adversity and eventually get you onto the path you've been on for the last 15 years. So you started Q4 on December 1st, 2005 with $20,000 from a friend. It's been almost 15 years and you're still hustling every day. Can you tell us about those early days and how you stayed motivated to keep moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think that it doesn't really change much, which sounds sounds crazy. Like when I think about day one of starting the company, and I had two companies prior, but this was my first like software company. I'd had two kind of more professional services kind of consulting companies, building stuff for other people. The approach to making progress, and I think this is what comes from kind of the DNA that was formed in being an athlete, is that, every day you only have a certain amount of time in the day. And I've always believed that time is the ultimate resource, because you literally can not get any more of it. So, kind of waking up every day and understanding what needs to be done in order to move forward. One of the things that is more straightforward in being an athlete is that that's pretty well defined, because the path is laid. Many other people have done it before. So you can follow programs. Whereas I found when being an entrepreneur, that path is not as clear, because you're constantly making choices as to like, what's most important. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I invest in this part or that part? And so that kind of like iteration and moving quickly. And, you mentioned hustle, and that's something that I think is really ingrained in me, is to always move with urgency and to be able to get as much done as possible and move quickly, make decisions quickly, move quickly. And I think that when I wake up today, I function very much in the same way I did as 15 years ago. what I'm focused on and what I'm doing is different. And the zeros are different than they were when we first started. But I think the approach to work is something that doesn't change. And I think that's really culture. I guess that's what I've learned is culture. That back then I didn't know that that's what it was. But, now I think no matter how big the company is, no matter what it is we're doing, we want to always approach it in the same way, which is kind of being true to ourselves in terms of like how I like to work and how I like to work with the people that I work with, approaching things in the same way. I think that's kind of, that's how I think about it in terms of like day one versus now. It's not really different internally, like in my own head, it's different externally, but my experience is pretty similar.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure if you hear like some top level CEOs speak as well, the hustle they put into their business today, whether it's a multi-billion-dollar business or a startup, never really changes. It's just the problems they're focusing on are much larger, but that sense of urgency and hustle and perseverance has always been with them in the beginning. It's just the ways that they were tackling certain things may have changed as new tool sets have come in.
When you're an independent athlete, it's all on you. So it's like, it's one person and you can control, what you're doing as an individual. As the company grows, what changes is the muscle that's required from a team perspective. And those teams get bigger and bigger. Like, early on, it's kind of like 1, 2, 3, 5, but then you get into tens and then you get into hundreds. The way in which to get things done changes dramatically, like the tactics you're going to use. Because you literally cannot do everything yourself. And that changes very, very early on. And I think that was one of the muscles that, I've really had to work on is how to drive performance through teams. And as the business gets bigger is how to do that more and more effectively as the company gets bigger. But so I think the evolution is different in the tools you use, but the approach is still the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, continuing on that same vein, that journey towards success. Everyone's seen this picture. You've tweeted it out. There's that arrow up to the right, which what people think success looks like. But can you actually tell us what your journey towards success really looked like versus the way people probably assumed it looked, and what mountains you had to climb while leading the charge at Q4?
I love this. This image. I think it really does tell a great story because, the reality, I think for maybe there are companies out there that are just straight up and to the right and they never do anything wrong and it just boom. I've never met anyone like that. I've never seen a company like that. I don't know. I think that's the true unicorn that does that actually exist. Because, externally, when you can't see behind the curtain as to what's going on, it can look like steady progression. For us, I think that there is, when you're trying to build a company, there's a lot of things you have to try. And you have to have an appetite for risk. And in many situations, things that you attempt to do don't work. And most plans don't work. And sometimes those are sometimes challenges or problems that happen are self-inflicted. We're going to try this new initiative. We're going to put a bunch of money against it and it doesn't work. And then, we're now short on money. So we have to address that. Other things are externally impacted, like, regulation change or like a societal change, like in the age of COVID, let's say you're like a travel tech company, your pain comes very quickly from an external force. So like for us, there was numerous instances of early on when the company, we had not found our footing. We had not figured out our business model and we were just grinding along and we hit 2008. 2008 was, came very close to the global financial market collapse and everything kind of froze at that point. And there was times during 2008, before that happened, that was in the fall of 2008, that we were still trying to figure out our model and, had virtually no money. I still don't really know how we made it from Jan 1, 2008 to we closed a round of funding right after Lehman Brothers collapsed, actually, which was kind of like a savior round for us. But there was periods there where, I was literally just, taking money from one place to another, maxing credit cards, borrowing money here, borrowing there to be able to continually make payroll during that period. But I think and that's one instance. And then, if I fast forward another couple of years later, there's another adversity that hits. And what I've always approached those challenges with is a sense of understanding, okay, like what stresses me out the most is when there isn't a clear path, when it's like too much uncertainty. We don't know I don't really care how difficult it is, so long as we know that's the direction we're going, this is what we need to get done, and then, you know, get to work. Like, what do we need to do, and focus on it and hustle against getting that done. So in any instance, when we've hit that adversity, I think that's what we've really built a strength around in terms of being resilient, is trying to figure out quickly, okay, like, what do we need to do in order to navigate through this, and then putting those plans together, and then putting your head down and just keep grinding. And thankfully, we've made good choices along the way that have allowed us to, I think the reality is, with each kind of period of adversity, we emerged as a stronger company, because we put new processes in place. We brought new people on that had skill sets that we didn't have. It kind of exposed, when weakness gets exposed, you know, you can kind of try to hide from it or pretend it doesn't exist. Or you can really go after it. Like, I'm the type of guy, like, oh, my elbow hurts, I'm going to the doctor. I want to know what's wrong. Tell me how we're going to fix this. I'm not a hypochondriac, but, you know, I want to know what the problem is so we can fix it. And I think that kind of rinse and repeat process as the company goes creates a stronger and stronger enterprise over time.
Yeah, it's like, you know, there's definitely a problem in front of you. You don't want to sweep it under the rug. It may not be the biggest problem, but you want to approach it just the same way as if there's a global financial crisis happening in your backyard. And you were right at the center of it. I mean, investor relations software is pretty close as it can get to the, you know, the eye of the storm when it comes to a global financial crisis. So, you know, I was on Wall Street during that time. I remember the Lehman collapse, living, you know, in New York. What was it like for you trying to see through the other side? And how did you kind of get through it?
I mean, the interesting thing is, it was difficult because we were burning a bunch of money and we didn't have a lot of money. And so we needed to raise a round in order to give us runway, which is the absolute worst place to be. You know, if you ever really need money to survive, that's the worst time to talk to investors. That's the worst time to talk to a bank, because even if they're interested, you're not going to get a great deal because you're desperate. In 2008, we were desperate, and I was open to the fact that we're being desperate. We were desperate. But what we learned going through it is the business that we had selected, this focusing on investor relations, or really the interaction between corporates and public company investors, you know, major mutual funds, hedge funds, et cetera, that our core business was quite resilient through that. That although it was difficult to get anyone to buy anything new, so our bookings basically were flat at the end of 08 through 09, flat was the new up. The core business did not atrophy. Like, we did not lose clients. They were not canceling. That business maintained throughout that period, which actually, as we got through it and we understood it, it gave us great confidence in the foundation that we were building. And it was actually after that period of adversity that we decided to dramatically expand the portfolio of solutions that we offered, and to really kind of double down on the vertical integration, that instead of just offering kind of one product in this stack, we want to offer everything, because we felt that if we do that, so long as the capital markets continue to function, then we're going to have a resilient business through pretty much anything that happens. So it's one of those examples of, like, it really hurt going through it, but as we came out of it, it allowed us to kind of see this platform that we had established, and gave us the opportunity to have this vision of how much of a bigger business we could create on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of like the definition of product market fit and mission critical software. If there's a time when you want to have investor communications at its highest, it's during a financial crisis. When everything's going well, you don't really need to do it because everything will do itself for you. But when shit hits the fan, you need to be there communicating. Well, it obviously worked. And now you've raised over 90 million in funding. You've completed 5 acquisitions and manage over 350 employees. So how has your definition of success changed over your career while leading Q4?
That's a really good question. A good friend of mine, who was actually the individual that was the first investor, so the guy that gave me that first $20,000 investment, he loves to throw back in my face that my pitch to him then was, if we get to 100 clients, then we've made it and we can sell this thing and we'll be rich. So he loves to throw that back because, you know, now we're at like 2,300 clients or so. The business is much, much larger than anything I had kind of fathomed very, very early on. That's the way that, at least that we think about it, and the way that I think about it is that there have been moments in time as we've gone through, you know, as you get into kind of Series B rounds and C rounds, inevitably you talk to strategics and you talk to companies that you could sell to. And in each instance, when we've had those opportunities, the business has always been performing well, and we seem to be kind of getting to this next plateau, and have always felt that we've kind of emerged over the horizon to see the bigger opportunity in terms of what this business can become. And so I think that kind of moving of the milestone, moving of the goalposts, I should say, it happens in every instance. Like today, right now, we have a goalpost that we're shooting for. And I know that as we get close to that, we're going to move it. Because I think what's inspiring for us is like as a company, you start as a product, but as that product moves to becoming a business, and then you start to see, okay, this is actually a platform. And then now we have the ability to leverage that into other things and to do other things with. I think it opens your mind up in terms of what the business can become. And I think that that's really important as a leader, is to have that, that I truly believe that every business is only limited by the imagination of those that are leading it. And whatever the limitations that are put on a business are put on those that are leading that business to say, this is what we are, let's stick to our knitting, let's do this. Those are the limiting factors. I think imagination and understanding about the platform you've created and what the business you're truly in allows you to be more open to thinking about what you can do with that business in the future. And we've gone through that in a couple of different instances. And so now when we think about what Q4 can become going forward, it's significantly larger than what we looked at 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, because we've started to have more visibility in terms of truly what the value of the platform that we've created is.
I also think that it's important for people to hear that story about how your friend gave you the $20,000 and their definition of success was like right just above that. And then obviously it started to grow to that level. And then you brought in a new group of investors and their definition of success was higher than that. And every time you bring in a new group of partners and investors, the bar gets raised higher. And some people say that's a bad thing because it puts a lot of pressure on the company. But if you're a CEO like you who thrives on that sort of, pressure to succeed, you actually should embrace it and keep on looking at that bar being raised as an awesome thing, not just as an additional pressure for you as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really speaks to understanding when you want to grow your business and you're looking to bring in outside investors. There's outside investors, which, friends and family, and they're a very different breed, because friends and family are going to give you a ton of rope and they just want to see you be successful primarily. When you deal with professional investors that are investing money that has been invested in them on a prospectus with expectations, it's a very different relationship. And I think it's important for people to understand that exactly what you mentioned, Matt, is the aspect when someone is investing, what are their expectations as to what is their investment horizon looking like, how far out, and what is their return profile that you're shooting for, and making sure that you're a good fit for that. If it's something like, if you're feeling like, okay, I'm confident, I think we can get we're going to be like 5x from where we are now in like a 5-year time frame, but you take money from someone that wants a 10x return in 3 years, like you're kind of inviting disaster. And so I think having that alignment, understanding, this kind of speaks to the core of what investor relations, being good at investor relations is all about, which is understanding who your shareholders are today and what is their profile and how do they look at the world. But then also understanding who should your shareholders be tomorrow and in the future. Because as the company grows, a seed investor is very different from an A, B, C, and then getting into growth equity, private equity, public company investors. They're all very different. And it's really important to understand where you are in that continuum to make sure that you're well matched with the people on the other side. Because I think sometimes people get in difficult situations because there is a disconnect there. And then you have something like, like a fund can make a decision because they have to, an investor can make a decision because of a fund dynamic that they have, not necessarily the business. That doesn't make them a bad person. That doesn't make them a bad investor. You have to understand who you're getting in bed with and what their motivations are. And I think if you do that well, we couldn't have built Q4 into the business it is today without all of our investors. Absolutely. There is no question. I mean, maybe over a 30-year time frame or something like that. But that outside capital is absolutely crucial. And there is also figuring out the investors that are great, that are going to help you build the business, that not all money is created equal. There are investors that can be incredibly helpful for you in building the business. And there's also investors out there that can cause incredible dysfunction in the business and how it makes decisions. And separating those two things is a skill that takes a bit of time, but it's absolutely critical to building a successful business over time.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we could spend a whole hour talking about investor relations on the public side and how you've sold a tool and platform to the public markets for investor relations, but also yourself as, a startup dealing with investors and your own relationship with them and how that has sort of graduated into what it is today. It would be an interesting tank talk, but we'll save that for another time. You've obviously built an incredibly dynamic and diversified team at Q4. What achievement are you most proud of today?
I would say it is the culture of the company. And, I touched on it before. When I first started it, and even in the prior companies, I honestly didn't put a lot of weight on culture. I kind of thought that culture was something that just happened. And in smaller businesses, it does just happen. And I think because of that, when you go from kind of one or two people, and then you're maybe 10 people or 15 or 20, you can put your hands around everyone. You're involved in every single hiring decision. Nothing is too far away. If Sally's not happy, it's evident. You can figure out what's going on with Sally and you can fix it. But as the business gets bigger, and the reality is culture has been defined there, and it's defined by who you hire and who you keep in the company. And everyone kind of approaches work in the same way. But as the business gets larger, if it's left to its own devices, the negative aspects of culture will dominate. So, the one naysayer, the one kind of cancer in the organization will grow, and it will override what you think is just naturally a good thing. And so I saw that in the company as it started to grow, that and then you're in the back seat. Then you have like, oh, this is a problem, and it's become much bigger than what we thought. And there's kind of this negativity in the business. And I woke up one day with Q4, this is years and years ago, and honestly, I just didn't like working there. I was kind of like, this is, how did we end up in this place where like I don't like working at my own company? And I realized then it's because I had let it go on autopilot. And so changing that has been a multi-year effort of really understanding who we are as a business, what is the culture, what are our values, and not values like kind of bullshit values that you put up on the wall. And it's like every company says them, like, oh, we're innovative and client focused and results driven. It's like, that's not what we're talking about. Like, we're talking about like what truly defines how do I tick and how do I approach work and how do I work with people. And then, seeing how much of that is across the entire company, like those real true values, that values are not something that everyone should agree with. In fact, some of them should be, some people should not agree with them. And we talk about that. Like, look, if you're not comfortable in moving quickly and having like kind of this hustle orientation, and some people, there's been negative stuff written about hustle, like hustle culture is bad. For me, I'm like, hey, if you think hustle culture is bad, you shouldn't work here. Like, you should go work somewhere else. Absolutely. Because that's the way that we are. And we're not going to change what we think is right to fit kind of new people coming in. It's like, if you don't fit in our value system, then you're not going to be happy and we're not going to be happy, so you shouldn't be here. So I think going through all of that is what you started at the high level, but then getting the programs and the policies and the process in place to be able to truly have culture being a driving force of the business is what ultimately creates an incredibly competitive engine. Because what culture does, culture is not like a foosball table or or the parties. I mean, parties are fun. I love parties. That's probably what I miss the most from this whole COVID world. It's an operating system. It's a method so that when someone sees a situation, they know what to do. They know what to do because they're just like, this is the way we operate. This is how I'm going to make a decision. And when you do that, the whole thing can move quicker. And I think as the business gets bigger, if culture isn't what's driving decisions, then it's bureaucracy that drives decisions. And bureaucracy means process, status quo, and that is slower. And I think there's a natural tendency as businesses get larger to slow down as they become more and more bureaucratic. And so what we've really tried to do is to focus more and more on culture. Not that we don't have process, we do. I mean, like there is, as the business gets bigger, you have to have all that stuff. But the more that you have culture as being the driver of decision-making, I think the faster it goes, the more innovation you have, and ultimately it allows you to beat competitors that don't operate like that. So that's I know there's a long-winded answer, but that's absolutely the thing that I'm most proud about when I look at the company, because it's also, I really see it. It's like, it's its own thing now. Like it's its own organism. It makes decisions on its own. It's its own thing. It's not like if I don't show up to work, it just keeps going and it makes decisions in the same way as whether I'm there or not. And I think that's probably what I'm most proud of.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously we talk about culture a lot with a lot of our companies. On the podcast, we've had a lot of people talk about, how they define culture in one or two words. What would you use to describe the culture in one or two words for Q4?
I mean, the values that we talk about are hustle and grind, and which is moving quickly, lean in, move quickly, don't be shy, but then also don't be afraid of the grind. Like grind it. It's important to acknowledge the fact that anything of meaning takes a shitload of work, and like you have to work hard. So move quickly and work hard and be committed to that. And over time, that creates great things. But we have, I mean, it's hard to answer it in one or two questions. We have a whole kind of culture code and framework and all this stuff, but those would be the kind of the two that I would throw out.
It reminds me of this line where it says, if the shortcut was easy, it would just be called the way. It's
Yes.
hard, right?
Yeah.
So anyone who tries to say that going down the shortcut route is just fine, well, that means they just don't want to put in the work to get through it the right way. And that's something that it sounds like you guys work on a lot at Q4. And that's a great segue into the side on competition. Obviously you were an incumbent when you started off in early 2005, and it's been a long journey to get to where you are now. But how has your experience being an elite athlete helped you deal with competition in the corporate world, given the large market players you're going head to head with?
So I love competition. I love competing because I think when you compete, it really forces you to try really hard and take everything you have to try to win. And I think with competing too, is that it's not about winning all the time. Like, yes, I love winning. I love the feeling of winning, but honestly, I think if we win or if I win all the time, then we're not trying hard enough. The bar is too low. Like you're sandbagging. If you win every single time, you're sandbagging. So like put it up higher, try harder to achieve more. So I think like that approach to competitiveness drives decision-making. And when you're a smaller company, but even today, we will make decisions, we will move quicker, we will try to move quicker, we'll make decisions faster, we will take risks on that I think some of our competitors wouldn't have. And that's allowed us to kind of get a crack initially, get a crack in the dam, and then continue to go after it. Like I think for us, once we see that there's like an opening in a market, then it's like, okay, point all the guns there. And doing that, then it has allowed us to create segments of the market that give us leverage. And then we've always, one of the kind of key aspects that we've built the company with is a beachhead approach, which is like to pick a market segment and like get into that segment and use that to kind of build credibility. And then once we have credibility in that segment, okay, go to the next one that we have. We now have leverage to get into the next segment and kind of rinse and repeat that process. So always looking for like, can we create a base of referenceable clients and then use that to move into the next piece, and then use that bigger chunk that gets bigger to move into a new product segment and then build that out and make that bigger and then use that lever to get into the next segment. That kind of approach has been helpful for us as we've built out our portfolio of solutions and also our geographic presence from our client base. And it's allowed us to also build enough kind of value and leverage to then start using M&A as another way to get into other additional segments, because we kind of build enough credibility and leverage that we can then start acquiring and consolidating some competitors. So that's kind of how we've approached it. And I think, these guys are still, the folks you have on the screen we have not beaten them. We're still working hard to build our markets and be competitive against them. And having said everything I just said, I also have a huge amount of respect for our competitors. So I know the leaders of these organizations. I spend time with them. I'm super friendly with them, which is also something which is maybe, I'm not sure if everyone behaves like that. I've met other folks that don't want to talk to their competitors. Whereas for me, it's like if I know a competitor's in a room, like at a conference or something like that, like they are my number one priority to not just talk to, but like to get to know what's your life, who do you like, because you also never know when a competitor is going to become your best ally, or potentially maybe you're going to do a deal with them or something. So kind of keeping your enemies closer is something that I've always thought is the best way to approach it.
Absolutely. Well, you thrive on being the underdog, and you love to keep your competitors and enemies close. And it's obviously working. I mean, you've been successful at beating out the competition to win some blockbuster customers. You've got, companies like FedEx and Nike and Walmart and Oracle and Visa. How do you keep your team humble and focused while still celebrating the big wins?
I think it's all about just the kind of continually raising the bar too. And that's also culture, is that, no matter how big it gets, there's a great saying that I grew up with, my dad said to me many times growing up, which was, don't believe your own bullshit. Which is, and that has really ingrained in me, which is like, literally, it does not matter what we have achieved, because it's all about what we are going to achieve. So yes, acknowledge the fact of that we have these. I mean, I love the slides where we have all the logos, amazing. But then I also, spend a lot of time thinking, like, are all these people happy? Are we doing a great job for them? Like, if we went to them and said, what do you think of Q4? Would they say it's amazing? There's always room for improvement. You can never, ever rest on what you have achieved in the past. It's always about tomorrow and what you're going to achieve. So I think it's, to answer your question around, like, how do you do that? I think that's culture as well, which is, I've said that phrase many times to the company, like, don't believe your own bullshit. And I think it really is true that the people that are the best are, ones that are always focused on the next. Yeah. And I think being humble doesn't mean that we're not competitive as well. Like, I've also told stories of the fact that, with competitors, we want to be as friendly and as humble in our interactions with them while we absolutely destroy them in the market. So it's like, being humble doesn't mean that you're weak. It actually means that you're stronger and more confident in what it is you're doing.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I'm definitely going to put up a saying on the wall at our office, because it is definition of culture. Don't believe your own bullshit. Someone will eventually call you out on it. So you might as well face it yourself first and deal with it. And being humble about, your success, back to that earlier slide on success. If you appreciate the hard work that you had to go through to get there, it's going to make the feeling of success way more. I mean, that is a great line.
With that really resonates with me is, it works on the way up. Like, don't believe your own bullshit. So if you think you're amazing, like, you're not.
Yep.
But it also works on the other side, because we also feed ourselves a ton of bullshit about negative things. So you lost the deal, or, you didn't get what you wanted, or someone said something publicly that you didn't think was fair. We can take these things that happen to us, and we can use that to make ourselves feel worse. And I think, and that's also bullshit as well. Like, bullshit works the other way, which is like, oh, you're not good enough. And that can drive stress. And I think whether it's the downside of that, like negative bullshit, or positive, neither one of them matter. Like, what matters is, like, keep a level head, push that stuff away, get back to task, keep working. And that's when great things happen. So I think it's helpful on both sides too, because I think bullshit can be incredibly powerful in a negative way as well, because some of the words that kind of come in our heads are not always positive.
Yeah, and I'm sure, athletes have that all the time. A lot of people try to bring them down and start stories and rumors about them and try to get them off their game. And, you got to stay level-headed and humble and focus on the right things. So that's really interesting, the parallels between those. Well, I want to just talk about, how the current world environment we're in right now, you're doing this from your, basement in your house, and obviously you're not allowed to have those parties that you discussed at the Q4 offices. So how has COVID impacted the company to date, and how are you able to maintain company culture and connection during this uncertain time?
So, COVID was surprising for all of us, how quickly it changed everything. Thankfully, when COVID hit, we went through a deep process, like all companies, changing budgets, reforecasting, thinking things through. What's the impact going to be? The good thing for us is that resilient business model that I mentioned before, in terms of being connected to the capital markets, that during this period, companies have leaned into their investors, and investors have leaned into companies. And our solution has emerged as kind of being essential service for public companies. So we've been able to, although there was a blip that kind of in maybe the third and fourth week in March, post that, the business recovered quite well and quite quickly. And so from that perspective, we've been really focused on understanding and leaning into our customers to make sure that we're doing everything we can to service them. But then also from the product mix perspective has changed quite a bit because, similar to this, that everything is virtual now. So we have a segment of our business that was virtual events like earnings calls and investor days and things like that we would do online. That segment of the business is really expanding, lots of different use cases and some significant growth happening in that segment. So from that perspective, really great. I mean, it's been feeling very fortunate that we were able to get through that and we had the opportunity to grow. Maintaining culture through it is challenging. I think the challenge is that on a kind of on a granular level is that everything is scheduled. What we lack in this remote world that hasn't been solved for yet is this kind of like connectivity that you'd have by working with people in an office. You can kind of like the brief interactions, like if you and I worked in the same office together, we just see each other, like, hey, Matt, how's it going? And not all of that is just surface level stuff. We might be, oh, hey, I had an idea. I wanted to talk to you about this or that. That kind of like ad hoc interactivity and connectivity that happens in an office is not replicated in a virtual world. In a virtual world, it's like, Matt, can I grab 5 minutes? Schedule. So this kind of the meeting scheduling component creates a different way that work gets done. And you don't have these large group events. I mean, we do town halls with Zoom, so you see everybody square, but it's very different from kind of the integration that you have. Having said all, so I think we were still figuring out like what are the rituals, how do we work together in this remote world? And I wouldn't say that we've figured it out. There's some things that are working well, others that aren't, and we're trying to iterate it and make things better. But I think the benefit that you have if you have a strong culture when you come into adversity is that you can really lean on it. And I think that the culture is something which is maintaining because, these core aspects were not pegged to physical meetings. Like it's not like our culture is defined by the parties we have in the ping pong table, but it's defined by how we approach work and how we work together. And I would say that investment that we had made in culture is paying dividends right now because of the ability for the company to continue executing and actually thrive in this environment is one, because of the business model for sure, but it's also because of our culture in the fact that everyone just like picked up and like buckled down and leaned in and like, we're going to get this done. And what's the problem? Let's move quickly. And we've seen the pivots that occurred and how quickly people have executed is absolutely from the investments that we've put in culture that are now paying dividends during this period.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it, the hustle culture, the willingness to go after those tough problems and solve them have definitely probably paid off. I mean, managing 350 people, multiple locations during a time like this can only, take a lot of time to figure out on a good day. Now you're dealing with COVID. No one's expecting you to have it all figured out, but it sounds like you have a good handle on it. And it also helps that the business has become somewhat mission critical to your customers during this time. So keeps people motivated as well to help, bring value to customers when they need it the most.
It does. I mean, we've benefited. We because of that resilience and the ability to grow, we benefited from the fact of being able to have good news stories. The business is growing. We're closing deals. We're adding new logos. We're expanding relationships. So all of that stuff is like, that's fuel into the culture that drives positive. I know there's other companies out there that are in more challenging situations because their industry or their particular segment is more directly impacted. And, I have a lot of empathy for those folks because I know how difficult that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very happy to hear things are moving in the right direction for you during this tough time. I'd love to move into my favorite part of the talk, which are book recommendations. And you submitted 4 great books here. So I'd love for you to just give us a brief background on each one of these and why they are favorites for you.
Yeah, sure. So Competing Against Luck is written by this guy, Clay Christensen, who wrote a book also called The Innovator's Dilemma or Innovator's Solution. And those are early books that I read in my career, which I thought were great. And I won't go through kind of explaining those ones, but just they're very good at illustrating kind of how companies break into new industries. And it was kind of instrumental in how we went about going after the segments that we did. But this book, Competing Against Luck, is really about how to build an innovation system. And instead of kind of building new products based on intuition and being, I think this is going to work, so let's build it. We've done that in the past. A bunch of them have failed. Thankfully, the ones more have succeeded than have failed. But as the company has gotten larger, those bets on intuition become so much more expensive. You know, you can't just say, oh, this is an idea, let's just try this. There's a whole bunch of cost that goes into trying it, so the risk is so much higher. Competing against luck is about a concept known as jobs to be done. And jobs to be done is a way of looking at what is the real progress that a customer is trying to make and how to build products and solutions that serve that need. A good example that I use is in the pre-COVID world, you know, in the office, we had a great coffee machine, this like espresso thing and beans, and we bring all this stuff in. It's like amazing coffee, but yet every day, a good segment of the population in the office would leave the office, go down the street and pay $5 for a coffee. So why is that? It's the same product. But if you really unpack it, and this is what Jobs to be Done does, is that the job is not caffeine ingestion or even coffee ingestion. What they're buying in that is the experience. So maybe they want to go for a walk with a coworker. Maybe they like the cafe they're going to go to. Maybe they like the barista. Whatever it is, like, you have to understand what you're really competing with. And I think that applies to more broadly against like all the products that we're building. The more you understand the real progress that a customer is trying to make, not just the functional requirement, but also the emotional requirement. Like, what emotionally are they trying to solve for? Like, you know, I don't want to do this with my boss because it stresses me out. Those things are what drives the most innovative products. So I think that book is and there's a ton of other stuff around Jobs to be Done, but that book is a great way to get started with it. The next one about That Will Never Work is about the story of Netflix, but from the co-founder that you probably have never heard from. Reed Hastings is the CEO of Netflix now. Reed has a different path. This guy, Mark Randolph, has just an incredible story about how Netflix was created, the trials and tribulations they had, the challenges they had. And that's what I love, books like that. I love real world stories about people trying to build companies that went through crazy, challenging times and they got through it and created something like Netflix. So I think that story, and it's a great read. It's amazing. The next one, American Kingpin, is about the guy who created the dark web site called Silk Road. My other kind of guilty pleasure is I love reading like about kind of crime enterprises. And the creation of Silk Road and how large Silk Road became. It started as a drug trading site, but then it moved into like arms and then like human parts. And it's crazy what the whole story is. It's not really a business book, more of just an incredible read about a story of what was created. And you end up with this guy who's like in his mid-20s, earning like hundreds of millions of dollars a month, running a global crime enterprise that he never really intended to create. An amazing story. And then Billion Dollar Whale is about the 1MDB scandal, which is a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund that this guy, Joe Low, basically he embezzled and stole billions and billions of dollars from this fund and supposedly invested in all these companies that were all fictitious. And it's about this kind of global financial enterprise that was created in the order of magnitude of billions of dollars. But it's also, it reads like a movie because there's things like on his 30th birthday, he hires Britney Spears to host the party and jump out of a cake. And he's partying with Paris Hilton and all these Hollywood elites. And he actually financed Wolf of Wall Street, which it's just an incredible story. It's an amazing vacation read. One of my recent favorites.
That's awesome. I love the variety here because they're all very different, from like, you know, the corporate side to the entrepreneurial side and then the crime side and everything in between. So thank you very much for those suggestions. Before we end off, Darrell, I always ask for any final words of inspiration for our audience.
So I probably would just come back to one is don't believe your own bullshit.
Yep.
And if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to build something, it's not easy. And I'm sure you've heard this stuff. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But it's what's important is to, on that don't believe your own bullshit piece, is no matter if it's good, it's probably not as good as you think. And if it's bad, it's not as bad as you think. Life is about kind of what's happening in the middle and living in the moment. So, keep your head down, keep your eyes on the prize, but keep your head down and keep working hard and great things happen.
Well, that's amazing. And you really do embody that stuff, Darrell. So thank you so much for joining us today. Your story is incredible. It's still going on. I can't wait to see how it ends. And thank you so much for sharing your story with our audience today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Matt. I really appreciate it.